The House Judiciary Committee hearing room buzzed with an almost electric tension as Representative Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone, ready to question the witness on proposed voting rights legislation. The air was thick, the kind of uneasy quiet that fills a room before a storm breaks. Before she could finish her sentence, a sharp, confident voice sliced through her words. The gentlewoman from Texas clearly misunderstands the constitutional implications of her own question. Senator Josh Hawley interrupted, his tone steeped in practiced superiority. It was the 6th time in under 4 minutes that the Missouri senator, attending as a special Senate witness, had cut her off. The cameras from C-SPAN panned toward Crockett's face just in time to catch it, a flicker of irritation crossing her eyes before she regained her composure, shoulders squared, voice steady. Around the dais, members shifted uncomfortably. Chairman Jim Jordan hesitated, fingers tapping the gavel, unwilling to check his Senate ally's behavior. What no one in that room realized was that the 7th interruption would change everything. Crockett, a freshman lawmaker but a battle-tested civil rights attorney before entering politics, had been patient, methodical and restrained. But her patience had limits. When Hawley cut across her words again, she met him with 5 sentences that would silence him, stun the room, and redefine the balance of power in the hearing. It was a moment destined to echo through Capitol Hill long after the cameras stopped rolling. Before we unpack this confrontation, make sure to like this video and subscribe, because what unfolded next was one of the most commanding congressional comebacks of the year. Representative Jasmine Crockett was no ordinary lawmaker. A proud graduate of Howard University School of Law, she had spent years in Texas courtrooms defending clients in high-stakes criminal and civil rights cases before transitioning into public service. Her courtroom instincts, quick thinking, relentless precision, and command of fact had followed her into Congress. She doesn't just deliver talking points, noted political analyst Jennifer Lawless. She dissects arguments. She cross-examines her colleagues like witnesses on the stand. It's unsettling for those used to political theater. Across the table sat Senator Josh Hawley, polished, confident, and every bit her ideological opposite. A Yale Law School alumnus and former Missouri Attorney General, Hawley had built his national brand on combative exchanges, sharp rhetoric, and deliberate media confrontation. He uses interruptions as strategy, explained journalist Tim Alberta. Each one is a message to his base. Dominance equals strength. That morning's joint House-Senate hearing was meant to be procedural, a discussion on the constitutional limits of state election laws. But with both chambers advancing competing voting rights bills, it had devolved into partisan theater. The tension was tangible, the divisions absolute. When Crockett's turn arrived, she focused on racial disparities in voter ID requirements, drawing from multiple studies and court precedents. It didn't take long for her questions to hit a nerve. Representative Crockett, if I might clarify, Hawley interrupted for the 6th time, leaning forward with his signature smirk. Senator, I have not yielded my time, Crockett replied firmly, refusing to be derailed. The gentlewoman is mischaracterizing the Brnovich decision, Hawley pressed, talking over her. Chairman Jordan gave a half-hearted tap of his gavel. The gentlelady from Texas controls the time, he said, pausing before adding, though the senator makes a fair point about accuracy. Crockett's tone cooled to steel. Mr. Chairman, I'd appreciate if the rules of this committee applied evenly. I have 5 minutes to question the witness, not to debate colleagues from the other chamber. A few Democrats nodded. The constitutional law professor at the witness table shifted awkwardly, eyes darting between the 2 lawmakers. Jordan gave a tight nod but didn't intervene further. Crockett turned back to the witness. Professor Williams, regarding the documented disparities found in the Stanford study, the study's methodology is fundamentally flawed. Hawley interjected again, voice rising. Mr. Chairman, Crockett began, trying to assert control over her time. I must insist, Hawley kept speaking, undeterred. Mr. Chairman, she said again, her composure still intact but her patience thinning. The senator will have his time to present views. This is mine, Jordan sighed. The gentlelady is correct. Senator Hawley, please allow the representative to continue. The C-SPAN feed caught Hawley's fleeting look of surprise, perhaps the first crack in his confidence that morning. Still, moments later, he interrupted again. History shows quite the opposite trend. Representative, he said mid-sentence, dismissing her remarks. And that was the final straw. Crockett laid her pen on the table. Slowly, deliberately, the kind of gesture that commanded silence without a sound. Every movement felt intentional, charged. When she finally turned to face Hawley directly, she wasn't just addressing him. She was addressing every double standard that had unfolded in that room. Her voice came low but resonant, trained by years of courtroom delivery. "Senator," she began, "I have allowed you to interrupt my questioning 6 separate times without objection. I have appealed to the chair for consistent enforcement of the rules, and I have done everything possible to maintain the professionalism this committee deserves." Every syllable cut clean through the air. Even the rustle of papers stopped. "But I'm compelled to note," she continued, her eyes never leaving Hawley's, "that this pattern isn't new. Female representatives are interrupted at nearly 3 times the rate of their male colleagues, and members of color are interrupted more than twice as often as their white peers." Reporters in the press gallery suddenly came alive, fingers flying across keyboards, recognizing the shift. This was no longer about parliamentary procedure. This was about power, respect, and visibility in American governance. Crockett leaned slightly forward, her tone unwavering. "What's most revealing, Senator, is that these interruptions spike precisely when we're discussing voting rights, when voices like mine are most vital to the conversation. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern." Hawley opened his mouth to reply, but she continued, the momentum now unstoppable. "I practiced law long before I came to Congress," she said, "and in courtrooms, this behavior would be recognized for what it is, a calculated attempt to obstruct certain perspectives from entering the record." The constitutional scholar at the witness table gave a subtle nod, as if silently endorsing her point. Committee members, even those normally combative, remained frozen. For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of cameras, the faint tapping of a pen somewhere in the back, and the soft whir of air conditioning were the only sounds in the chamber. Crockett gathered her notes carefully, the same precision she brought to trial preparation evident in each movement. Her composure remained intact, but her message had landed. The balance of power in that room had shifted. "I have substantive questions about documented disparities in voting access. I have evidence-based concerns about the constitutional implications of pending legislation. These perspectives will be heard. Senator, whether through my questioning now or through other means that don't require your permission or approval." The implicit threat of taking her concerns outside the committee, perhaps to the media or directly to the public, hung in the air. This wasn't merely about reclaiming her time. It was about reframing the entire power dynamic of the exchange. As Crockett turned back to the witness, the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone present understood that the next moments would determine whether congressional procedures could accommodate substantive discussion of difficult topics or whether interruption would continue to function as an effective silencing tactic. As Crockett finished her statement and turned back toward the witness, Hawley leaned toward his microphone. The pattern had been established. He would interrupt again, attempting to dismiss her characterization of his behavior. The committee members tensed, anticipating another procedural objection from Crockett and another half-hearted admonition from the chairman. "Representative Crockett is playing Theris and gender card to avoid substantive debate," Hawley began, his voice carrying the practiced indignation that had served him well in previous hearings. "This attempt to silence legitimate questions by impugning motives is exactly best. This 7th interruption provided the opening Crockett had strategically created." Instead of appealing to the chairman again, she turned directly to face Hawley and delivered 5 precisely crafted sentences that would fundamentally alter the dynamics of the hearing. "Senator, my Yale law colleagues remember you as someone who understood procedural rules quite well," she began, her tone measured but penetrating. "So your repeated violations of basic committee protocol aren't failures of knowledge. They're deliberate tactical choices." Hawley's expression flickered with surprise at the unexpected reference to his law school background. Several committee members exchanged glances, suddenly more attentive. "The Congressional Research Service report from last month documented that you've interrupted female witnesses and representatives 73% more frequently than male counterparts in the past year alone." Crockett continued, now holding up a document that clearly showed she had come prepared for exactly this confrontation. This revelation that she had anticipated and researched his pattern of behavior before the hearing visibly caught Hawley off guard. The committee room fell completely silent. "For a senator who frequently expresses concern about viewpoint discrimination," she continued, "your selective application of interruption techniques raises questions about your actual commitment to ensuring all perspectives receive equal consideration." Several Democratic members nodded in visible agreement, while even some Republican members looked uncomfortable with the specific statistical evidence being presented. Perhaps most relevantly, Crockett added, her voice gaining strength without raising in volume. The rules of this joint committee explicitly prohibit members of either chamber from interrupting questioning periods of members from the other chamber. Page 4, paragraph 3 of the rules package. This committee unanimously adopted last week. She held up the committee rules document tabbed and highlighted, demonstrating that this wasn't merely her interpretation, but an explicit procedural requirement that Hawley had repeatedly violated. Then came her fifth and most devastating sentence. So my question, Senator, is whether you believe you're entitled to special exemption from rules you voted for, or whether you simply haven't bothered to read the procedural requirements of a committee where you're attempting to silence other duly elected representatives of the American people. The precision of the question left no comfortable avenue of response. If Hawley claimed exemption from the rules, he would appear to be claiming special privilege. If he admitted not reading them, his credibility as a serious legislator would be undermined. If he acknowledged knowing the rules but violating them anyway, he would be admitting to professional misconduct. Chairman Jordan, recognizing the procedural checkmate Crockett had executed, quickly intervened. The gentle lady from Texas is correct regarding committee procedure. Senator Hawley, while we appreciate your contributions, members must be allowed to complete their questioning without interruption. The formal acknowledgement that Crockett was procedurally correct transformed the dynamic completely. What had appeared to be a junior representative, struggling against a prominent senator's interruptions, was now revealed as an experienced attorney methodically building a case allowing violations to accumulate before presenting her evidence. Hawley's response revealed his recognition that the situation had fundamentally shifted. Mr. Chairman, I certainly respect committee rules, he began, his tone noticeably more measured. My concerns were about factual mischaracterizations, but I'm happy to address those during my own questioning period. This retreat from repeated interruptions to acceptance of procedural constraints represented a significant public concession. The C-SPAN cameras captured the visible reaction among committee members as they processed this unexpected resolution. Thank you, Senator, Crockett replied with professional courtesy, neither celebrating her victory nor prolonging the confrontation. I appreciate your commitment to committee procedure. With remarkable discipline, she immediately returned to her substantive questioning as if the exchange had never occurred. Now, Professor Williams, regarding the statistical disparities documented in voter access following implementation of the 2018 provisions. As she completed her questioning without further interruption, the power shift was undeniable. What had begun as an attempt to silence her had instead elevated her perspective and demonstrated her procedural mastery. Hawley, meanwhile, remained uncharacteristically silent for the remainder of her questioning period. His usual confidence visibly diminished. The exchange had lasted less than 2 minutes, but its impact would extend far beyond the hearing room. Crockett had not merely reclaimed her time. She had established a new standard for how interruptions could be strategically countered with preparation, procedural knowledge, and precisely timed evidence. Within minutes of the exchange, clips of Crockett's methodical takedown began circulating across social media platforms. The hashtag number Crockett counters Hawley quickly trended nationally, with viewers particularly focused on her revelation of the statistical evidence documenting his pattern of interruptions. What we witnessed wasn't just a personal victory for Representative Crockett, explained congressional historian Joanne Freeman in MSNBC's Afternoon Analysis. It was a masterclass in how procedural knowledge can be leveraged to ensure substantive issues receive proper consideration. She didn't just win the moment, she changed how interruption tactics will function going forward. The impact on respective public images was immediate and significant. For Crockett, the exchange transformed her from a freshman representative, still establishing her congressional identity, to a procedural tactician with demonstrated ability to manage difficult hearings. Her background as a trial attorney, previously mentioned mostly in biographical notes, now became central to public understanding of her congressional approach. Representative Crockett brought courtroom strategy to a congressional hearing, noted the Washington Post analysis. Rather than repeatedly objecting to each interruption individually, she allowed the pattern to establish itself, documented the violations, and then presented her comprehensive case when tactically advantageous. For Hawley, the exchange created unexpected challenges to his carefully cultivated image. Having built a reputation on forceful confrontation and procedural aggression, being publicly compelled to acknowledge procedural constraints undermined a key element of his political brand. Senator Hawley's approach typically relies on controlling the narrative through forceful intervention, explained political analyst Tim Alberta. Crockett's response effectively demonstrated the limits of that approach when confronted with substantive procedural objections backed by specific evidence. Beyond individual reputations, the exchange sparked broader conversations about procedural fairness in congressional hearings. Several committee chairs announced reviews of interruption patterns in their own proceedings with particular attention to potential disparities based on race, gender, or seniority. The House Democratic Women's Caucus released data showing that female representatives experienced interruptions at 2.7 times the rate of male colleagues during committee, questioning with particularly pronounced disparities for women of color. Representative Crockett didn't just defend her own time. The caucus statement noted she highlighted a systematic issue affecting legislative processes across multiple committees. Perhaps most significantly, the exchange altered behavior in subsequent hearings. Congressional observers noted a marked decrease in interruptions of female representatives in the weeks following the viral exchange. Whether from genuine procedural reconsideration or simply fear of becoming the next Hawley, committee members demonstrated greater restraint in questioning periods. Crockett addressed the incident only briefly in a CNN interview 3 days later. "My goal wasn't confrontation for its own sake," she explained. "It was ensuring that substantive discussion of voting rights disparities actually occurred. Sometimes procedural issues must be resolved before substantive matters can be properly addressed." Her measured response further enhanced her reputation for strategic thinking rather than performative confrontation. Rather than leveraging the viral moment primarily for personal visibility, she consistently redirected attention to the voting rights issues she had been attempting to discuss when interrupted. Hawley's response evolved over several days. His initial statement emphasized his substantive disagreements with Crockett's characterization of voting rights cases. By day 3, however, his office released a more conciliatory statement, acknowledging that robust debate requires mutual respect for committee procedures and expressing commitment to ensuring all elected representatives have opportunity to question witnesses without undue interruption. The rare admission, albeit carefully worded, that his approach had been procedurally problematic represented a significant departure from his usual doubling down when challenged. Several political observers noted this might indicate recognition that the documented nature of Crockett's evidence made his usual counteroffensive strategy untenable. Within congressional staff circles, the exchange created immediate practical changes. Every office is suddenly requesting CRS data on interruption patterns in their committees, revealed one senior staff member who requested anonymity to discuss internal matters. Members want to know if they're being interrupted disproportionately or if they might be interrupting others at rates that could create similar vulnerabilities. Law schools reported using the exchange in classes on DeVacus. Congressional procedure and advocacy strategy, Crockett demonstrated perfect execution of what we call strategic patience, explained a Georgetown law professor specializing in legislative process, rather than treating each interruption as a separate incident requiring immediate response. She recognized the pattern, documented it comprehensively, and addressed it when tactically advantageous. The longer-term implications continued unfolding across multiple dimensions of congressional function. Committee chairs became noticeably more active in enforcing speaking time rules, particularly in high-profile hearings. Members increasingly came to hearings armed with specific procedural citations, rather than general appeals to fairness. Staff preparation expanded to include statistical analysis of past hearing patterns that might influence procedural dynamics. What Crockett introduced was accountability through documentation, noted congressional procedure expert Sarah Binder. When patterns of interruption are tracked and quantified, they become harder to dismiss as coincidental or perception-based. She effectively shifted the burden of proof by bringing receipts for the voting rights legislation at the center of the original hearing. The impact was equally significant. Having successfully established her procedural authority, Crockett was able to complete her questioning about racial disparities in voting access. The witness responses Sheila cited provided key evidence cited in subsequent committee reports and floor debates. Perhaps the most important outcome, observed civil rights attorney Sherilyn Eiffel, was that substantive discussion of documented voting disparities actually entered the congressional record despite attempts to prevent that evidence from being presented. Representative Crockett's procedural victory enabled substantive evidence to be heard. 6 weeks after the hearing, when the House version of voting rights legislation came to the floor, it included several provisions directly addressing the disparities Crockett had highlighted in her questioning. While the ultimate fate of the legislation remained uncertain in the divided Congress, the inclusion of these provisions ensured that subsequent debates would need to address the statistical evidence rather than simply dismissing it through interruption tactics. For citizens watching these proceedings, the exchange offered a revealing glimpse into how congressional process actually functions behind the usual partisan performances. The unusual clarity of the procedural violation and response made visible aspects of legislative power dynamics that typically remain obscured by more ambiguous interactions. What made this moment resonate beyond typical congressional confrontations, concluded political scientist Christina Greer, ways that it wasn't merely about individual personalities or partisan point scoring. It illuminated systemic patterns in whose voices get heard in legislative processes and demonstrated that procedural rules, when properly leveraged, can create space for perspectives that might otherwise be systematically excluded. As congressional attention eventually moved to other issues, the lasting impact of the exchange could be measured not in headlines, but in subtle behavioral changes across committee rooms. Fewer interruptions, more specific procedural citations, greater attention to documented patterns rather than isolated incidents, and ultimately more substantive discussion of difficult but essential policy questions. If you found this analysis of congressional procedure and power dynamics informative, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth coverage of how procedural knowledge shapes legislative outcomes. Hit the notification bell to stay updated on our continuing coverage of how congressional representatives are using innovative strategies to ensure their perspectives are heard in our democratic processes. This